And we'll be going to part B. So part B is in the activities and exercises, creating a library, entering a reference manually. That's the first two exercises. And then afterwards, we'll look at exporting reference from a search interface, such as a database, adding PDFs, and using the PDF viewer. So I'll tell you a bit about it first, then I'll demonstrate it, then I'll give you time, and then we'll recap. To start from the start, from your machine, when you start the exercises, when you get time for it, click on the Start menu, find EndNote, and open EndNote. If you've got this reminder or advertising, just click off it. You'll have a grey screen. To create a new library, you may remember I showed you, you go to the top left and under Edit, there's a number of, you go to the top left and under File, there's a number of options. One is to open an existing library, but for you to create a new library for this exercise, click on New. And you'll be asked to name your library, and you'll be asked to save it somewhere. So name your library a useful name for the exercise, for example, practice, and then save it. Now, the basic rule is that you should be saving your library, your central library, to the C drive or to the hard drive of the device you're working on, not to a cloud store, to the hard drive. We'll talk about that a little bit later. For the moment, I'll just save it. And you'll see when you open your library and save it, there's nothing much in there yet. There's nothing in the groups, nothing in the list view, and nothing in the individual views possible. So these are exercises 11 and 12. This is 11. 12 is adding a reference manually. Now there's a number of reasons why you need to know this. In the first place, you won't always be able to export information automatically for a reference into EndNote from a database or a search engine. Sometimes you'll have to create a record manually yourself. Also, you need to know how to enter the data to create a correct record. And this is because whilst EndNote, I suppose the principle would be that EndNote should do all the formatting to insert citations correctly formatted in Word documents. There are some things that EndNote can't do, and so you need to know what the rules are for entering data. And there are instances, like I was saying before, where when you import data, it's not complete or correctly formatted, so you'll have to edit the records. Now, there's a number of ways you can do most things in EndNote. One of them would be to use the word ribbon, for example, the icon functionality ribbon. And to create a new reference, there's a little sort of Word document icon there. If you hover over it, it'll say new reference. And when I click on it, it'll open a new record. And you may see this looks very much like the individual tab called reference, and that's what it really is. It's just expanded across your whole screen. Step one is to select what reference type that you would be creating. So you might have a book, you might have a government report, you might have you might be wanting to describe a chapter. In this case, for the exercise, we're choosing journal article, and we're leaving it at that. Now you'll see in your exercises, there's a table there, and that's the data that we're asking you to enter by practice for the exercise. And there's some notes next to it which give you an idea of why you might want to know how to enter this data or how to check it. So for example, author, there's a number of ways you can enter authors and it'll still be correct. And for example, one way would be in the form a personal name followed by family name, such as Teresa Heng. Now each author should have a new line or row. So for a next author, click the enter button. Another way you could enter an author, or if it's imported this way it's correct, is in the format family name, comma, space, personal name. For example, Tsai, comma, Ingrid. And the other thing that you'll get a lot of is you'll need to know to put a comma after a group author. So a corporate author, something like a department of government, an organization, a company, a committee, something with a compound corporate name, such as Amnesty International. Followed by a comma. And the reason why you would put the comma there is so that EndNote will know that you're not just entering an author in the form personal name, family name, like Teresa Teng, because it would then treat that differently in a bibliography results. It'll say something like international, comma, a, full stop, depending on the style that you're using. So those are the different ways for author. For the year, it's just data. So if you've got APA, you don't need the brackets. So following that table, when you get to it, it'll just be 2012. But for the article title, you need to make sure that it's entered, or that it is presented when you're copy pasting it, perhaps in a way that it should be presented according to the style. For example, in APA and in Harvard, a article title should be presented in the form of a sentence case. So starting with a capital and everything else written just like you would write a sentence in English. But of course, there's sometimes compound words and abbreviations that do also take capitals in the middle of a sentence. EndNote's not smart enough to figure that out itself, so you have to do it to make sure that it is presented correctly. For example, soil types in Australia, where Australia takes a capital A. Similar for the journal, the format for a journal title in APA or in Harvard is headings case. So most words starting with capital letters, except for articles and things like that. So Journal of Soil Engineering. Also good to note, because most of the time you might not, when you're doing a manual reference, you won't necessarily be typing it. You might be copy pasting it from a PDF, for example. That'll save you time. So make sure that when you're doing that, you're not also copying an extra space or an extra full stop. That would be expressed as well. For the other parts for this exercise, all that's needed is the data, 20, 2, and the page range, 13 to 20. So no italics needed, no brackets for the volumes and so forth. So to close your record, as I was saying, mentioning before, I'll just show you this by dragging at it. To save your record, just close it by going to the top right and clicking on the little close icon, not the big one, but the little one. And that will save your record as your first record in your list view, and then you'll be able to preview it and see that it's got the correct formatting and so forth. So what the exercise 14 is exporting from a database. In this case, we're going to use EBSCOhost, a particular EBSCOhost database, Academic Search Elite. Now, the process is very similar across different search tools and databases. In EBSCOhost, these are the steps. So after you've got a set of results that you might want to export from, step one is select what you want to export from your search results. Step two, you'll often need to, in an EBSCOhost, you have to open your pre-selected results, because that will allow you to choose an export to EndNote option. Step three is to choose an export option to EndNote. Occasionally you have to select which software. So in this case, we're doing EndNote, but other people may be using Mendeley or another software. So you just have to make sure that it's correctly selected. In EBSCOhost, it already is. So at that point, you'll just need to click on Save to confirm it. And then EndNote will try and import that, and what will happen, depending on your browser, is a file download window will appear. You click on Open, and EndNote then imports that file download. At that point, it would be good to check your references. It would be a good point to make sure that all the data is correct. So first I'll demonstrate it, and then I'll also demonstrate how to create a group, and then I'll give you some time to do it. So Emma's put a link into the database that we're going to be using in the chat, so that will save you some time there as well. I'll just Google it. So it's EBSCOhost QT if you're Googling. Otherwise, just click on the link in the chat. If you're Googling it, click on the top results, the one that says QT library EBSCOhost. Sometimes you'll, depending on updates and so forth, you'll be asked to approve any new conditions, in which case just accept. And also, if you haven't logged in yet, you may be asked to authenticate. You may be asked to authenticate, in which case use your QT logins, your username or student number, and your password. You'll get to this page, which is a list of the databases that are available on the EBSCOhost platform. And for convenience sake, just click on the first one, Academic Search Elite, and get a set of results up that we can do the exercise with. So an example search might be bone disease, because we need results before we can start exporting them. Now, step one, after you've got a set of results, is selecting the results that you might want to export. So assuming this is a great search, please click on the first 10 results. So to select in EBSCOhost, next to each result, click on the little blue folder icon. That's how to select. In another database, it might be a tick box. In this one, it's a folder icon. It's blue. When you click it, it becomes orange. So do that with the first 10 or so. Looks like I've already done it myself. And as you're doing that, when it goes orange, you also see that it becomes possible to open that pre-selection. When you click to select, to the right of the top of your search results, there's a folder has items that becomes available. And to access your pre-selection, click on Folder View. That opens what you've just selected. So instead of the 30,000 in the results before, I've now, well, in my case, I've got 13. In your case, I hope you'll have about 10. So that's the next step. The next step after that is to find the export option. To the right of your opened pre-selected results, there's the options to print, email, save, and export. So click on that one. And that will bring up a new interface. And this is one of the places where you might want to change the referencing style if you're using a different referencing manager. But of course, we're using EndNote, and it happens to be already correctly selected. Direct export NRAS to EndNote. We're not using EndNote Web, we're using just EndNote. So rather than selecting, all you have to do here, following the steps there, 14.7, is to click on Save. Now, depending on which browser you're using at this stage, you'll see something different. If you've got, for example, Firefox, if you're using Firefox, then you'll see a file download window in the middle of your screen, in which case select Open. If you're using Edge or Internet Explorer, then at the bottom of your screen you'll see a bar, in which case from that bar select Open, and in my case I've got Chrome, and you might have seen it animated a little sort of download to the bottom left, and at the bottom left I've got that download little tab or tablet, and I can, from the chevron, select the options, and I can then also click on Open. When I click on Open, the results will be imported into your library. So I've got these 13 results here. By the by, this is a good spot or good time when you've just imported your results to check that they're all correct, that they've all been correctly imported. So click on the results, check in preview, and then make the improvements to the records at this point. I'm not asking us to do that today, but I'm just pointing out that this would be a good time to do it, because that way you know that your results are correct after you finish this part of the process of getting records. So that's exercise 14. The next exercise is 15, creating and populating a group. So remember at the start we looked at the left-hand groups pane, because at some point you'll want to search your records rather than just browse the whole list, and at some point you want to organize your records into groups so that you can use them for different purposes. So there's a search pane over here, and you can make that search pane as complex or as simple as you want. You can search for different fields, you can search for all fields, you can search in PDFs, you can search in PDF notes. That's one way to create groups, I suppose. But another way to create groups is to just simply, with your cursor, hover over the left-hand groups pane, and above the bolded text, right-click. It'll bring up a set of group types to use. The simplest one is just group. So the exercise asks you to click on that to create a group. It'll ask you to call it something. So for example, in this case, we've got a bunch of results about bone disease, but it could be, you know, chapter 1, chapter 2. It could be work, study. It could be project 1, project 2. It's however you want to organize your references for different purposes. So that's got 0 results in it. And you could then click on your list view, use Control-A to select all your records, and then drag and drop that slowly, that's one way to do it, over your Groups tab. So that's populated 13 results in there. I've still got the same results up here, so all we're doing here is creating a sub-view that allows you to look at your own references or parts of your references for particular reasons of organization and use. On the right-hand groups pane, right at the top, you've got all your references. Now, those are all the references in your library at any stage. The groups are subsets, which aren't actually references that have been moved. So they're still just part of all the references. There's no moving about of references, as it were. It's just a way to look at your references for different reasons. And if you're deleting a group, that doesn't delete them from all references. But if you're deleting something from all references, you'd be deleting them from your groups as well. And you could change or delete them sort of in a similar way to creating a group, which is you could right-click on a group and then select delete group. So notice at the moment I've got 14 in all references. When I delete this subgroup, which has got 2, it'll give me a little reminder, are you sure you want to delete it? It'll still be 14. So it's just a way to look at different references for different reasons, and whatever reason you want to have for organizing references, that's why you would use groups. Now, there's a number of other activities following this import from a database, as well as creating groups. Essentially, there are other places that you can import from, which have very similar steps. The library search and Google. You could use Google Scholar. You could use Google Scholar to import results individually or just like a normal database, but you need to be logged in for that. So have a go at that as well sometime later after this session. One thing to note might be that in terms of the quality of the data, it's best to use a native publisher database rather than an aggregate search over the top of it. So something like Science Direct or EBSCOhost would give you better quality and more complete data than Google Scholar or itself would. On the other hand, Google Scholar may be a little bit quicker. And then there's also activities for different kinds of groups. So this was just a simple group, but there's other ones that you could use as well. So there's create a smart group. That's if you really want a lot of control over what goes in or goes on in your own library. It's the basic principle is that you can create a search, and that search will automatically create a group and organize a group based on the search, which is a search of your own library essentially. And it will auto-populate references that you import into groups depending on the search statement that you've got created. There's also a create from groups, which is either a union or a subset of different groups, so have a think about that. And then there's the group set, which is the I suppose the major category. So you could have one for study, one for work, one for chapter 1, one for and whatever sort of higher level category you might want to have. And you can move things between group sets if you want to as well. Next, we'll have a look at, because what we've done so far, it's just create records in our own library. So records without any PDFs. But you might also want to store PDFs and associate them with your references. And use EndNote as the place to store your PDFs. And I suppose the benefit of that would be that that you've already got a structure of how to organize your PDFs, because you've got your citations there and you've got your groups there. So it's a way that you can organize your own PDFs. That's one good reason why you might want to. The other reason might be is that EndNote can help you a little bit with a workflow of how to do your own literature review by marking whether you've read things, adding notes, doing markup over the PDFs and so forth. So that'll be a plus. The exercises are 22, where we'll be trying to download the full text associated with the references we've just created, and 23, using EndNote as a PDF viewer, just to see how we could mark up PDFs with EndNote. And I'll demonstrate that first, and then give you some time to complete the exercises. Now, the find full text functionality is relatively easy as a number of steps to take, but in terms of its success, it does vary quite a bit. You can ask EndNote to try and extract the PDFs from references that you've got populated in your EndNote library, but it'll give you a PDF more likely if the source that you're trying to get a PDF for is a highly described academic source, mostly journal articles, and especially if you've got a journal article that's recent with a DOI, a direct object identifier, as part of the metadata, as part of the description in either the record or in the PDF itself. Then, if it's got a PDF, if it's got a DOI, there'll be a fair amount of success with this functionality. If it doesn't, then there'll be less success, and you'll have to, if you want to use EndNote as a place to store PDFs, do it manually. Essentially, download it from a database locally to, so for example, a desktop, and then importing it or adding it to your references. So let's have a look at how that would work. So exercise 22, step 1 is select the references that you want to get a PDF for from all references. So make sure you've got all references selected. Then click on the results in your list view, just to select one. Then use Control-A to select all the results in your list view. Then from the icon ribbon at the top, we had a look at new reference earlier. Go a little bit further. There's a little magnifying glass, I think that's what it is, with a PDF icon in the middle of it. And if you hover over it, it'll say find full text. So click on that. And when you get to doing that, you'll notice that in the groups pane, at the bottom of the groups pane on the left, under find full text, a process will start. And that's EndNote trying to extract PDFs from the databases, authenticating to the databases. So sometimes if you're doing this, you may get a window that asks you to authenticate, in which case just put in your QT details. Or you may just get a list of databases in a little sub dialog box, and it'll have a process button at the bottom, in which case click on processed. So either way, after you click on find full text, authenticate, or click on processed, you'll get this process happening here. And the success rate will vary, like I was saying. So I've got 8 non-found. That's not good. That's not a good result. All right, sorry, 8 found. Yes, that's better. I'm still looking for one, and there's 5 that are not found. After that process is finished, or as that process is going, you'll notice that icons will start to appear in the list view next to each reference entry. These little icons with what looks like a paperclip. That gives you an idea that it's been successfully imported for that one. And as you can see, it's a little bit over half for these results. When you do have the PDFs associated, you can start using EndNote as a PDF viewer, and that's exercise 23. So when you get to that, click on a list entry with a PDF icon associated, and then from the individual pane on the right, click on the PDF tab, and you'll see there's a small view of a PDF that you've got selected that's associated with a reference, and some icons at the top, one of which is the one on the top left, little square with an arrow sticking out of it, and that's where you can open this into a full PDF viewer. So you can use EndNote as a PDF viewer, including markup and adding notes. There's strike through, there's underline, there's highlight, and there's sticky note from the functions at the top of the screen. So when you get to that, give that a go and see how it works. And remember also that when you're using the search in EndNote, it's not only that you can search the records, you can also search the text of the PDFs, and you can also search the notes that you may have associated with the PDF. So you can insert notes in a PDF with text in the locations that you might feel relevant or that you might want to mark up, if that's useful to you, and search those notes. Okay, how did everyone go? I hope everyone was able to get some PDFs downloaded. And it varies quite a lot, not only on the DOIs, but sometimes it depends on which database you're using, and occasionally even on the time of day. It sometimes varies quite a lot. And so you can see that because it depends very much, this ability to extract PDFs automatically, it depends very much on how a source is described, especially the DOI in a journal article, that it's going to be of less use in some areas than others. So if you're using a lot of journal articles, it's more useful. If you're not using a lot of journal articles, it's less useful. But it'll still save you time. So in my case, like I got here about 2/3. On the other hand, it's still not going to be able to get all PDFs. It's always going to let some remain online, and you'll always therefore have to do some kind of manual adding of PDFs. And I'll just show you this. I won't necessarily give you an extra bit of time for this, but because it's an extra exercise, but I'll just show you how you would do that. And as Emma said, you basically have to go back to the database or whatever search interface that you're using and manually download it, the reference that you want to have, download it to a local location such as your desktop, and then add them to the reference. There's two ways you can add a reference a PDF to a reference, and this is activity 24 for future reference. From the individual pane, there's the preview reference and PDF tab. Then there's also the little icon there, the attached PDF icon. So if, for argument's sake, I have already downloaded the PDF, and I might want to add it to this reference here, which doesn't have one yet, I could then click on this little paperclip icon. It'll show a little interface, and it's basically asking me which file do you want to add. And in my case, I've got one on the desktop that I've downloaded earlier. I can then double click on it, and it will then import it next to the reference. It won't show until you move to another location. That's kind of the process of saving it, but there it is. So that's the find full text. And another thing you might want to know about, in some cases, you may already have a lot of PDFs, and so if you're then still thinking about using EndNote as the place to store that, then you can try and import those PDFs. It's possible, and this is activity 25 for future reference. And you can try and import them by single file or by a whole folder of files. But it will try and create reference records for whatever you import, but the success rate will vary quite a lot. In the same way that the success rate for importing PDFs from interfaces varies quite a lot, because the reason is the same. It'll successfully create a record automatically for you if the PDF is already well described and has a DOI, because what it does is it tries to get that information from somewhere online. And I'll show you how that would work. So from the top left, if I click on File, there's an option to import either a whole folder of PDFs or just a PDF singularly. If I click on that, it'll bring up a little file upload interface. First, I have to find it, in this case from the desktop. Second, I have to choose the import option, because you can import all kinds of things. So make sure that you select the PDF option as the right filter. And then click on Import. And that will then import that PDF and try and create a record for it automatically. And that's this one over here. And so we'd want to check in preview how successful that is. And if there's something wrong with it, you'd want to update it in the reference field, perhaps with the help of the data in the PDF itself. So you could copy and paste bits of the PDF into the reference field until your preview is the right reference information for the style that you've got selected.